Welcome to the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I interview business leaders who are committed to their own growth and the development of everyone on their team. If you enjoy my podcast, be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for joining me today. I am your host, Meredith Bell, and I love bringing to you people who are focused on their own growth and development and also committed to the development of the people in their world, whether it's their team or an entire organization. And that's really the focus of my company too, which brings you my podcast, growstrongleaders.com. We are committed to helping people improve the way they communicate with and connect with each other in the workplace. And you can learn more about us at growstrongleaders.com. Today, I am really excited to bring to you someone who really embodies the whole purpose of my podcast, Eboni Adams Monk. Eboni, welcome to my show.
Thank you, Meredith. It's so good to be here.
Well, I want to give a special thanks to our mutual colleague and friend, Tim Shore, for introducing us, because that was just such a wonderful moment to get to know you because of Tim. And Tim has been a guest on my show, and I would like to encourage my listeners to check out his episode, which is number 144, where we talked about limiting beliefs. Eboni and I are going to focus on some different things today, and you'll see why as I describe to you her wonderful experience and qualifications. Eboni is the Vice President of Marketing and Commercial Excellence at a specialty chemical company. She has trained leaders in Six Sigma and facilitative leadership principles, and she has received numerous leadership and teamwork awards. Eboni draws from her studies with elders from traditional communities around the world to inspire transformational leadership and life-changing growth to help others succeed at work. So I love that her focus has been on her own growth as well as the growth of those around her and inside an entire company. And her experiences with these different cultures led her to write her beautiful and I think very powerful book called Leading Wise, which I'm holding up for those of you who are listening. The subtitle is Inspirational Reflections for Corporate Leaders. We're going to talk a little bit about that book today, as well as other things that are really important to Eboni and her perspective on those areas related to leadership and growth. Eboni, first, tell us a little bit about your journey to the work you're doing today and your writing of this wonderful book.
Absolutely. Well, I started my career as an ambitious college graduate, just like many of your listeners. I'm a chemical engineer by degree. And over the years, I've worked for a few companies, but I've spent most of my time working for a good part of my career at W.R. Grace. I started there as a chemical engineer, and I had several promotions over the course of 25 years that ultimately led to me becoming vice president of marketing there, which ultimately led to the work that I do today as vice president of marketing and commercial excellence. And while all of that was going on, I also had this parallel journey where I was learning with cultural elders from Brazil, some leaders who live here in the US, but represented communities in the Native American traditional community, West African communities, Hindu communities. And through becoming a part of their communities, I developed a deeper relationship with myself, as well as with others and the earth. And I began to slowly incorporate a lot of that philosophy and those learnings into my work. So it wasn't just my personal life, it was also incorporating those things into my work life as well. I showed up as my true self, no matter where I went. And one of the things that was remarkable to me is I witnessed leadership from the leaders of those communities in a more powerful way than I had with some of the leaders that I worked with and was learning from in the whole corporate world. And I saw that leadership could be powerful, not because it was forced, but because it was actually based in truth and concern and love and purpose. And as a result of that, I incorporated that philosophy into my own leadership, and it really guides everything that I do.
That's so great. There's so many things you brought up that I want to go into with you. And, I think you made an important point here that I want to explore. You were talking about the distinction between work life and personal life, and really it's all one thing. And I like that you describe it that way. For folks that are used to compartmentalizing their lives, how would you recommend they do what you did? Show up as their same self, no matter where they are at work or at home?
Yeah, so my belief is that life is life, right? And we are at work thinking about our personal life. We're late for work because something in our personal life was going on, right? And when we're at home, we're thinking about the workday. The first thing many of us do is we come in and we either get on the phone or we have a conversation with the people in our household. And we first say, how was your day? How was work? So these two things that we tend to separate are actually the same thing. Work is an expression of our talents during a certain part of our day. It's something that we do to make money, to give us fulfillment, to be productive in the world. So for people who are trying to bridge that gap, if you will, I would ask a couple of questions. What is your mission in your personal life? And what is your mission in your work life? Maybe those things are the same, maybe they aren't. And I believe that the bridge is learning how to connect our personal mission to everything that we do while we're at work. So as an example, for me, if I believe that part of my mission is to bring a different perspective to the world, right? First and foremost for myself, but also to the world, to be open to new ways of thinking and new ways of doing things. That can also be my mission at work. I can live that mission at work. Mm-hmm. I can allow personally, I can listen to others more. I can bring in different perspectives. I can be the one to bring all the people into the conference room to have conversations that perhaps we haven't had as deeply before because we didn't have the right voices in the room. So I'm living that mission while I'm at work. And that for me is the missing piece for people. We don't need to separate. In fact, our work life that we want to compartmentalize, those hours of the day are actually made more powerful when we're able to live and understand and be true to our personal mission, our personal purpose.
Mm-hmm. That's so great. And I was thinking about, in your book, you talk about purposeful leadership, having a purpose. Too often, I think we get wrapped up in the doing of things without backing up to really look at what's driving that? What is my purpose that I can bring to this situation? So how have you helped leaders? Because it really does have to start with leaders recognizing the importance of having this purpose so that then they can encourage the people on their teams or the people within the whole company to also show up with purpose. How do you help them discover or slow down enough to identify what that is?
Yeah, so I fundamentally believe that purpose fulfills the soul. It is incredibly fulfilling when every part of our being is aligned and working toward our purpose, or maybe just not even working, just being authentic and being who we are. And so one of the things that I do for leaders is I ask the questions that I just asked. What is your purpose? And maybe I'll change that second question to your why. Why do you lead? And then ask yourself, are those two things aligned? So that's the first part. Awareness is key. And one of the things that I like to do is to help leaders discover what their purpose actually is. Sometimes we're so busy in the day, we forget, we lose touch with those things that bring us so much life that we forget what our purpose actually is. And I love the process of helping leaders to discover, rediscover what their purpose is. And then digging into that why. Why do people lead? And really diving into the questions around the decisions that we've made or the situations that have been thrown at us that have put us in a leadership position. Those things are really critical. And one of the ways that I do that is by helping leaders to, as you said, slow down and just sit back and reflect. And often, I'm like most of your listeners, I'm in those Zoom calls, I'm in the conference room all day. 75 to 90% of my day is in the conference room. And so when do we actually have time to sit back and think about the decisions we made, the decisions we need to make, the conversation we had with one of our colleagues or one of our direct reports? When do we actually have time to just sit back and think about how did that conversation go? How could that decision have been more effective? If we don't have the time to think about those things, then I am for certain that we don't take time to reflect on why am I a leader and how do I show up? And I love just being able to create space and to be able to guide leaders to be able to take and create that space for themselves, to sit back and just reflect.
Reflection is a big part of what we teach also. I really liked your broad definition. There were so many applications of reflection that you brought up in your book. And I would love for you to talk about that. You addressed one, which is who has time to reflect when I'm barely able to get done things that are on my task list, right? And then I'm supposed to stop and reflect. What the heck? So talk a little bit about the benefit of that and also the consequences if we don't take that time to reflect.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a part of a mindfulness community, and mindfulness traditions embrace, I would say, slowing down enough to observe what we're doing, what we're thinking, how we're feeling. And the act of slowing down and just breathing and slowing down the breath is very powerful. So there are a lot of studies, your listeners can Google the physical benefits in the body of actually slowing down the breath, calming our nervous system, and getting the brain to just find rest and a little bit more balance between the right and the left brain. So when we are doing, most of the time, that's that left brain, it's all about, we have to do this. We're thinking about the decisions we need to make. And the right brain, which is that creative part of ourselves, it is the part of us that is deeply intuitive and where wisdom can open a pathway for clarity and wisdom. It doesn't always get a chance to express itself. So when we just slow down and just breathe, that's one of the things that I just tell people very powerfully that you can do in between a meeting, before we start a meeting, when you're in the conference room or waiting for people to come in, and just take a moment as the topic is being introduced and just slow down your breath. Just nobody even knows you're doing it. Just an inhale and then an exhale. And that can be very powerful. A lot of times we don't think we have time to actually reflect or to meditate or to be mindful or to relax, but we do. We have these moments, and that's all it takes is just a moment. My teacher says to come back, to return to ourselves again and again and again. And that is the practice of mindfulness. And mindfulness gives us space to reflect. It's where we can observe, where we can open up to that wisdom. We become clearer. We may be guided to engage other people to get a different perspective. we have deeper conversations, and we make better decisions, and we feel more comfortable with the decisions that we make. And I don't want to gloss over the fact that when we show up that way in the workplace, we're also building trust with our teams in a more inclusive community, because we're not rushing to just get things done. We're actually slowing down, inviting in others' opinions, creating deeper relationships. And that's really the power of reflection and slowing down.
Mm-hmm. As I was listening to you, I'm breathing, also noticing my own breath, and also thinking about the impact of a leader's demeanor and presence on others. And if I could get my listeners to just think of a time when you've been in the presence of a leader who was calm and centered, you could feel that. And contrast that with someone who is, you sense, you feel it, that rushing, that pressure, that moving fast. And it feels different, I think, to the people who are around that individual in terms of what they pick up and then what they feel compelled to do. So I think that's a key aspect of leaders becoming aware of their energy and intensity, and what impact that has on the people around them, because that it's raising that awareness that you were talking about, becoming more aware of how are people responding to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I was in Brazil with one of my elders, my teachers, a mother of sorts, Yalarisha Valdeci Brito is her name. And I remember how we could be in a room, 40, 50 of us, drums playing in the background, and there could be this issue, this situation that arises, and everybody is in a frenzy. Maybe there's some disagreement or some discord of sorts. And I remember her just kind of sitting back in the middle of this and just listening calmly, peacefully. It was almost as if she wasn't even there. And she just let everyone just let it all out. And then at the end of that, she said something very simply like, okay, well, let's go on. It was and everyone just calmed down. And you could almost sense that people would kind of say something, they would complain about whatever it is, address the issue. And then they would kind of sense her energy that was really just peaceful and calm. And they would kind of calm down. You could see each person kind of calm down. And then at the end of that, it was almost like, I'm sitting here peacefully. Yes, this situation is going on, but let's go on very peacefully. And she transformed that room just because of her body language, her demeanor, her ability to still listen and be present, but also to hold space for the energy of peace. Very powerful.
Perfect example of what I was just thinking about. That's great. Yeah, it just the impact, her being silent for most of the time, but people picking up that energy. I think we sometimes underestimate our energy that we bring and what people can read and sense from us. You mentioned the word power too, and that's another, theme in your book that I loved the way you talked about it. I actually really hope my listeners will buy your wonderful book, because the way you express things, even though it's a quick read, it's a book worth reflecting on, because you ask wonderful questions in it. And the way you talk about power is that it's something sacred. And, I think in Western cultures in particular, we think of getting in a position of power. You approach that quite differently. And I would love for you to talk about the different facets of power that you've seen, you've experienced, and you bring to the organizations you work in.
Yeah, we could talk about this for days on end, because it's such an incredible phenomenon, I believe. I learned about power, first of all, by looking at leaders, let's just keep it to the corporate world, looking at leaders in the corporate world. And there are a lot of images of people, doing things, not necessarily the best things, right? To get into positions of power so that they can control and command. And if you think about the ocean is powerful, but it doesn't have to do anything other than simply exist. When the wind blows, there are waves. When it's agitated, there are waves. And sometimes those waves are more powerful than other times. But the ocean is just the ocean. The river is the river. And over time, one of the things that the images that I have from West African traditions is over time, the river has the power to make rough stones smooth. And that is the kind of power that I would love for all of us to explore. Love doesn't have to force, it doesn't have to command. It can simply flow from wisdom, a place of wisdom, from a place of love, and still be just as powerful. I don't think anyone would deny that the ocean or river is powerful, particularly when we depend on it for our survival and for life. And to me, that is the epitome of real power. One of my teachers she said very eloquently that real power happens when we are able to drop into our hearts and to live from a very authentic place, that is power. So for myself, and I would encourage your leaders who are listening to this, if you are in a position to influence others, to provide guidance for others, to help to grow other people, to shift the organization and perhaps be a voice that isn't always heard or present a perspective that perhaps is being overlooked, that is power. And to be able to transform other people, it could be your people on your team, your colleagues, even the people that you report to. That is the epitome of power. It's the kind of thing where someone walks into a room and they say nothing, but they say a couple of sentences in the course of a 1 or 2 hour meeting. And that 1 or 2 sentences helps to shift the conversation. Those 1 or 2 sentences may not be the answer, but they may shift the energy in the room so that we can get to an answer that is productive, that helps us to meet our goals. That is power. And one of the things that I realize is that kind of power happens when you develop yourself. And when you're very self-aware and you are open to discovering the best parts of yourself and expressing those, and the worst parts of yourself and shaping those, just like that rough rock is shaped by the water, that is how we develop that kind of power as a leader.
Oh, that's beautifully said. And as I was thinking about someone coming into a meeting or a conversation, the question that came to my mind that they could ask themselves, how can I be a positive influence in this situation? Because I think that's what you're really getting at. It's looking at how can I make a contribution that moves things forward, as opposed to being the cynic, the critic, the person who brings the situation down by, and I'm not saying no one should question anything, but there are ways of doing it, right? That either cause people to get engaged and want to respond and make them want to withdraw because they feel they're being criticized or judged.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I think about community, and I think about the elders that I've had the blessing to be able to watch and be a part of their lives, their whole goal was really about harmony. And Harmony doesn't mean that everything is nice and neat and pretty. Sometimes you have to ask the hard questions in order to get to the other side, to be able to solve a particular problem or to address a certain issue. But if you think about what is harmony, what does harmony in this situation look like? Right? Often in our positions, there is no right answer. There is just a best answer for that moment. And that's how, and I think about harmony, that's what I think about. Leaders that are willing to perhaps challenge the status quo a little bit to say, how can we bring more harmony into this situation? And it may not be easy to get to that, but it's probably possible. And really, that's a lot of what I really connect with is how do we take these kind of ordinary moments and make them extraordinary just because we tweak maybe part of our implementation or we allow a different perspective to be heard that maybe helps us to shift how we do things a bit.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of community and community building, every person in an organization, especially leaders, I think, can influence what kind of community are we building here. And let's just take an example where a leader comes into a situation where there hasn't been harmonious working together, and it's not as positive of a situation as they might hope for. What are some things that a leader can do to help build a community where people trust each other, they're willing to be honest and open with each other?
First, I would say as a leader, we have to be really clear about our role. Are we showing up as the commander? Everybody just needs to get along, figure it out. Or are we showing up as the guide, as the person who can provide some insight, maybe some wisdom into this particular situation? When people in an organization or a culture has the energy of not getting along, it didn't happen overnight. And it didn't happen by magic. It happened because of the people and the personalities and the relationships that have been formed and allowed to blossom however they've blossomed, as beautiful roses or as weeds, right? And so as leaders, if we understand our role is to come in, we have the option to guide. We can choose that option to be a guide. And that takes, first of all, self-awareness and a deep understanding in our own capabilities. We may not be able to do all of it. We may need to be strategic about how we get to a harmonious place. So that's the first thing. As a leader, stop, check in with yourself, observe, and allow yourself to really accept what you are observing. The other thing is then we get into deep listening. So we've spent most of this conversation talking about kind of the inner listening. And this is really more of an outer listening where we're listening to people, to have conversations with the people on your teams. Try to understand the backstory, how the current situation evolved. That is very, very important because as leaders, we want to make sure that we are solving problems at the root, not just dealing with the symptoms that we see on top. Bill and Jane, you all need to just get together, right? Apologize. That doesn't necessarily get to the root. If people in the organization have some beliefs that perhaps limit the way in which they interact with each other. And as leaders, we actually are in a position to help those two people in this case to actually help them to understand what's at the root and perhaps give them some tools to help them grow those pieces of themselves. So deep listening is important. Modeling how to have relationships with people. If I'm kind to someone on my team, then perhaps they'll say, wow, that was a different approach. Maybe I can be kind and share that with someone else. I definitely believe in the power of entrainment. It is real, it happens. And building a strong community is about having good leaders who show up like those elders to give wisdom. It's about having dedicated teams, people who are dedicated to the company's purpose, but also to themselves and how they contribute. And it's also about building a strong culture, a culture of inclusiveness, a culture of reflection, a culture of growth, and kind of stepping outside the box and perhaps doing things a little bit differently.
That's so well said. And it's such a great place, I think, to kind of wrap up, because you've pulled together all the elements that are not only in your book, but I think are so important to you at your heart. I guess one final thing I'd love for you to comment on, because COVID, has taken such a toll on people over the last couple of years. And I know something else that's important to you is this whole idea of leadership wellness. Mm-hmm. What have you seen has worked well to help leaders, take care of themselves so they're available to, handle the stresses and challenges that their people have been dealing with?
Yeah. So, a lot of the challenges that I have observed, I've felt, I've heard people talk about is just with the pandemic, being scared, being annoyed, feeling really uncertain or anxious. Our relationships may have changed, not only our relationships with our coworkers, but even within our families as we adjusted to working at home and being with each other perhaps a little bit more. And one of the things that my teachers, my elders talk about, and this is just such juicy wisdom, is when it comes to pandemics, they were very clear that the pandemic was a time for us to go within. It is a time to respect the earth and nature and this thing that was pretty much out of all of our control. And it was an opportunity for us to really think about, what do I need to do differently? How am I showing up in the world? And so I would ask your listeners, what did you learn? Okay, where were you triggered, and what did you change? And how did you shift? And if the answer is, I'm exactly the same, I would say, I don't believe you. But if that is the truth, then I would say, this is an opportunity to take some time and just reflect on how you showed up for the pandemic, right? What feelings did you have emotionally, mentally, what was going on? And even physically, like, how did it show up? In your bodies. For many of us, our sleep patterns changed, right? That's significant. It impacts our entire life. Mm-hmm. And so what I always say is kind of two things. One, we've already talked about. One is slow down and just reflect. Reflect on what was happening. And as we begin to exit from the pandemic, what's coming up for you? Sit back and reflect on that. And the other thing is, get into nature, because that is really what this was. It was really nature showing up and saying, I'm here, respect me. You humans are not in control of everything. We are here to be in harmony together. And so I always tell people, get out into nature, however you like to get out into nature, whether it's swimming in a lake or walking nature trails or bird watching or whatever it is, just get out into nature at least once a week. But if you can do it more, do it as often as you can, because it's very settling for the body and it forces us to reflect many times.
That's great. Love that. Wonderful words to close with. Eboni, this has been such a great conversation. I know that many of my listeners are going to want to connect with you and learn more about you and get a copy of your wonderful book here, Leading Wise. So please share with them how they can do those things.
Sure. So the book, Leading Wise, is available on Amazon, Indie Books. Just put in Leading Wise. The book is there. And then if you want to stay connected with me and the work that I'm doing, there are a couple of ways. One, head over to my website. That's probably the easiest way. It's Eboni Adams Monk. So it's my name, EBONIADAMSMONK.com. You can go there. You can sign up for my email list. You can click to follow me on LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook and all those places. If you prefer just to go straight to those places, you can do that. It's at Eboni Adams Monk on all social media channels. And I also have a few videos on YouTube. So if you find that you can't get into nature, they have these 1-minute reflection videos where it's just a reminder to just sit just for 60 seconds, 1 minute, just to sit. You have your little dose of nature, you get a little breath and chance to slow down.
That's great. Well, we will include links to all of those, including those videos on the show notes page of your interview when it goes live. Eboni, thank you so much for being such a calming force in the world, and also such a source of, this wisdom that you've learned from these elders, and you've integrated it into who you are, in addition to the beautiful person you already were. And so I just love how you show up in the world and how you came to our conversation today. I really appreciate you.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much. And thanks to you for all the work you're doing.
Thanks for tuning into my podcast. Now head over to growstrongleaders.com and check out our 2 books, Connect with Your Team and Peer Coaching Made Simple. While you're there, download the free facilitator guide to find out how to implement our unique peer coaching system. Until next time, I'm Meredith Bell.